Welcome to the Pindown, your Detroit Pistons podcast. I'm your host, Wes Davenport from Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys. And if you are joining us live here on YouTube, you would see that I am still, well, not solo, but my usual co-host, Blake Silverman. He is still out this week. We, just like I mentioned on the last show, we're going to give him this additional week just to continue to work through that adjustment process now with him having two kids. I was joking with our guest here before the show. He's playing man coverage now, right? They can't just go 2-on-1. They'll box in one coverage. None of that. That's all gone. That's all gone. So we're letting him have that adjustment. But we have a special guest host joining us today. This is Sean Murphy from the From Half Court podcast. He's also a credentialed media member. He's newly a Detroit resident. Sean, man, thanks for joining on today.
Wes, what's going on, man? Always great to pod with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you on. And I do have to shout it out. Because I just kind of made the change and then absolutely forgot to mention it on the last show. This is new music. So, I mean, what did you think about that new intro music? Good, bad? Have we ruined it? I was going to
say the whole intro, the graphics, the music, I thought it was all A+. Well done.
All right, we'll take it because, you know, the old music had a copyright claim on it. So YouTube kept getting mad at us. So we had to switch it up. But so, you know, hopefully that wasn't too bad. We got Mimsy313 already in the chat. Said, you know, speaking of the home stretch, how's dadhood? Was this going good? Going good. If you could believe it, already at a month old now with our new daughter. So it's been fun. On that note, actually, before we get into anything else, Sean, if you don't mind, I want to just play a really, really sweet, really heartfelt voicemail message that we got here from a caller and a listener named Jacob. And honestly, so I mean, we've mentioned it before, guys, like the voicemail stuff that you guys leave. It's this, Blake and I, this is kind of our favorite part of the show, getting to actually hear your guys' voices on our show. It's more like, you know, we're talking more like a radio kind of setup. So we have a lot of fun with it, but you know, this was so sweet. I was tearing up a little. So we got to throw it out.
Hey guys, this is Jacob, and I don't really have a question this time, but I just wanted to say congrats to both of you on your growing families. And welcome to the Girl Dad Club. I just took my 6-year-old daughter to her first Pistons game a couple Fridays ago against Memphis, and it was incredible. We just had the best time. It inspired her to want to do a basketball camp this summer, and she wants to go to at least one game every year now. Her favorite player is Kay, of course, but she has orange hair, so her second flavor is Kevin Huerter, and we got to see some good moments from Kevin. It might have been his best Pistons game to that point. So you guys have a lot to look forward to with all that. I know it's crazy right now in these early stages, as you know, Blake was having your second, of course. But push through it. You'll get there and turn them into Pistons fans, just like I did with my daughter. So, yeah, like I said, don't really have a question, but just wanted to let you guys know, congrats on all of that for both of you. Appreciate what you guys do. Keep up the great work on the podcast. Thanks. Bye.
That's the best part of sports.
Right?
Yeah, that's what it's all about, man.
It was so cool, and you know, just hearing that from Jacob there, and then you know, the craziest part about it, my daughter's got red hair too, so I was just listening to this, and you know, you're thinking out into the future, and like, oh man, like I'm gonna get to do that one. It just awesome. So I'm gonna send that message over to Blake as well. I'll text that to him so he could listen to it himself. But you know what, Sean, I feel like we have to do the classic podcast, good sports podcast host thing. And let's use this as a transition to talk about maybe Kevin Huerter having some of his best basketball games for the past two. What have you thought of Kevin Huerter?
Yeah, I think, you know, one thing that, you know, as a parent, and, you know, like something that like JB, you know, and like the coaching staff talked about was that, you know, with Kevin Huerter, there's kind of been so much focus on his jump shot and, you know, him being able to get that going, that there hasn't been enough focus on all the areas that he can affect the game and complement, really well. And even Jalen Duren talked about it last night after the win over the Pelicans. He said, before I played with Kevin Huerter, he was, I just saw him as a shooter. But now that I've seen him for a couple of weeks, now that I've played with him, I realize his game's a lot deeper than that. And I think that's the real sentiment, I think you see online, and that's kind of where I've landed too, of he's just a, dependable, smart basketball player. He's very similar to, like a Duncan in the sense of he might not be the best defender, but he gives a, he's always in the right place. He's where he needs to be. And honestly, at times he does make some pretty good plays on that side of the ball, but also he is someone that if you need to hand the ball to, he can run some quick pick and roll offense, or he can help facilitate things. And when you talk about a team that's lacked ball handlers and shot creation, the fact that you have someone that if you need him to do that in the second unit, like once or twice in a quarter, like he has that capability. And then also as he builds confidence in those areas, we've seen the shot starting to fall a little bit more. And when he does piece it together, and as you pointed out on Twitter as well, it's not a hate on Jaden Ivey. It's just objectively you are getting something that you can depend on more reliably from that position. And, especially when you look at when Ivey, even when he was playing in Detroit, some nights you had some pretty good 3-point shooting. That was probably the one part of his game where, there was still improvement, but, he couldn't move well. And, that's just, whereas with Kevin, it's like the only questions about his game are whether or not the shot's going to come. But even then, what we've seen is he can still affect the game in positive ways. What does that sound like? Pretty much half of the Pistons rotation. So that's kind of the one thing. But there is at least the ceiling there of it's not the mechanics. It's not the, it's not that he's a bad jump shooter over time. It's sometimes a lot of that, can be mental. Sometimes that can be, fitting within an offense, being comfortable in an offense. And I would say he certainly has, a lot more players he can lean on here in a more dependable route than he could when he was in Chicago. So all that to say, I've been really impressed with his play. I would be hard pressed, to not see him in the rotation in the postseason. My one question is Ron Holland the casualty of this? Because we've kind of seen, at least over the last week or so, his minutes have kind of been a little bit lower. I think I saw you average over the last 2 or 3 games, 8 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I mean, he's really in a shooting slump too, right? I think that last game against the Pelicans, he was doing far better, being the usual Ron Holland, right? Finding other ways to impact the game even without his scoring. But we kind of saw this earlier in the year, right? He just kind of, I think it was maybe in January, he just went through a real bad down shooting month, really. And his minutes started to wane off with that too. And then by the time he kind of got his feet back under him mid to late February, now that's when everyone was getting all excited, right? He was having all those really good games and stacking things together. Might just be a little bit of a second year wall here coming up near the end of the season. Yeah. I would be shocked, honestly, if he's really the casualty of Kevin Huerter getting more minutes. I feel like that's going to come down to either Karis LeVert or Javonte Green, and it might be, it might be one of those things where in round one they're still looking at playing 11-ish guys on a daily basis, on a nightly basis. But what they do is, JB just kind of uses that first quarter to figure out who's got it. Right. Yeah. And then it's really a 10-man rotation from there. I could see that being the path forwards. But I mean, Ron Holland, his defense is so impactful for this team, even when that shot's not falling. And you mentioned 100%. With Kevin Huerter too. Kevin Huerter, I've been really impressed with his ability to stay in front. And, to your point with the shooting, the interesting thing with Huerter is he's got the reputation, right? Teams guard him like a shooter. You look at that Pelicans game. I know he went 4 for 7. The game before that, he went 0 for 2 in 20 minutes, right? He was just coming off a cold night where he didn't even really take the number of threes that you would wish he would take. And the Pelicans still, from that first shot attempt from 3 onwards, the rest of the game, they guarded him like he was a legit shooter. And that's not nothing for a team that does lack floor spacing. Even if there's just a perceived threat, regardless of if he's going to make it or not, that's actually pretty valuable. And he's leveraged that pretty well to get to the rim, I think, better than most people would expect. But specifically better than Duncan Robinson, which is who you kind of one-to-one compare it to, especially in that Pelicans game where he filled in for the role.
For sure. I've seen people say, oh, he should start over Duncan. And I would say, well, let's slow it down in the sense of Duncan is a lot better of a 3-point shooter right now. He does bring more length. He had, this starting lineup objectively has been one of the best in the league this year. So it's not something when healthy that they really have to tinker with. But, it certainly says like, okay, like you said, it's like, especially with what we've seen thus far and, like throughout the season, like, I don't think there's really much of a case for Caris LeVert to play over him in current state. I know, JB, I know JB does, respect Caris a lot. I know he is a solid veteran where it's like, I don't think it's necessarily all as bad as everyone makes it out to be. Like, there are moments where like he does make good plays and, like he can produce, but like, it's whether it's the health and just not being able to chain, games together consistently, whether it's just where he's at in his career, where it's just kind of, hitting a point, especially where he kind of had some weird traumatic injuries at the beginning of his career. Now, he's kind of having his lowest averages, since his time, in his rookie season. That could be role related. I don't think it entirely is. So, to your point, like they're going to have to shrink the rotation, at least in sub capacity, like there is just an inherent trust that's different that you need in a postseason when you have to win 4 out of 7 and there's real urgency, to get as far as you can. So I definitely envision, some adjustments to be made there. But Kevin Huerter's making the really strong case, like you said, where, like defensively, he's someone that, he can stay in front of his guy. He's going to be in the right place. And then offensively, he commands enough respect as a shooter to where he gives a team that has real spacing problems just an extra inch of space, which is all the difference in the world.
And I will say just very quickly too, like there has been a little bit of synergy between LeVert and Huerter these past 3 games, and it's new. So like, we'll see, right? Does that actually stick around? And once Cade's healthy in the playoffs, do LeVert and Huerter even really get that many minutes together now that Daniss Jenkins is going to be more so that backup point guard? I mean, we're going to talk about Marcus Sasser here this evening, but the injury to Marcus Sasser is really what necessitated the LeVert and Huerter minutes, right? So, is that going to stick around? Who knows? But I do think that it looked good. Yeah. Before we move on, though, I want to get your opinion on that. But I'm really curious. Mimsy 313, quick with the button. I didn't do that. When Sean was about to cuss on the show, which we don't do here. Yeah, he did that. How did you do that?
I have a soundboard. I have like a whole I have a soundboard. When it's working, it does a lot of different things. I still have to get it working again because ever since I moved over here, the only thing that works is the bleep button. But like normally I could have it where it's like I have like my voice can echo. There's like auto tune on this thing. Like oh my God. Oh yeah, when the powers are at their full potential, I can get really stupid. But as of right now, all I do is the little bleep, which I just think is objectively funnier than just cursing in itself. So yeah.
No, I love it. And so classic me, I was thinking it was so much more complex. I was like, does he have like an AI that like is on the computer and like figuring out when to hit the button? Is there a secret like third person in this room, right? I was really okay. So good to know.
Yeah, I have an intern on retainer whose sole job is to just hit the button. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, so back to it. Curious your thoughts on that kind of LeVert. That's kind of the name combination there, right? Yeah. LeVert and Kevin Huerter synergy, but also, we have seen here just a absolutely dominant stretch out of Jalen Duren as he's now the top billing on every opponent scouting report. You saw it even against the Lakers, and it just didn't matter. So I'd love to get you kind of up on a soapbox on that as well, but open floor.
For sure. So I'll just start quickly with Huerter and with LeVert, if you will. I think just they're two like veterans who have played in a lot of different teams. They're guys who I do think they are like above average high IQ basketball players who know like where to be and when. And I do think like if those guys have like a skill that's kind of lacking throughout like the other parts of the rotation. They are able to improvise and they are kind of able to help generate offense on the fly. Obviously there are some sets and things that they do, that they do run like pre-ran plays, but like sometimes, in the flow of an offense, you are just kind of, feeling it out in the moment. And so, they are able to, direct flow. And I think they've done a good job of playing off of each other. And, especially I think there's something to be said about guys who have been, who have been traded a couple times or guys who have been on a few different teams, just the like learning the ability to adapt and learning how to like play within a flow and how to like communicate. That's something that Karis and Kevin have both been through now a few times. So I think there might be something to be said about that. But, Jalen Duren, it's like, if you want to talk about like the breakout star of the league this year, I think it's clearly been Duren. And I think he's been, if you're talking about like the most pleasant surprise of the Pistons season, it's the fact that like, we all knew that Duren had all-star potential, right? Like, I think we all knew, like, if he just, like if him and Cade, their 2-man game, like if they continue to do what they do and he just gets a little bit better in the defensive end, all-star potential's right there. It's becoming a different conversation with his face-up game, the fact that he's scoring at the volume and the efficiency that he's scoring. I mean, since returning from All-Star break and for the suspension and all that, he's averaging 24 points, 11 boards, 1 block a game, only 1.5 turnovers, and he's shooting like almost 67% from the field. He before the All-Star break, he had 2 30-point games. He already has 4 since after. And, like you talk about like the fact that the Pistons are, like they're now 4-1 since Cade went out with the collapsed lung, which people, said the Pistons were going to fall apart, that, they're going to look awful. And I'll be honest, I thought they were going to go on a little bit, like a 2 or 3 game skid as well, just because naturally when Cade's such a heavy piece of what they do, but it's the fact that he's been able to consistently night in and night out. Like I tweeted earlier this year, I'm truly struggling to find the amount of teams that can actually handle Duren's physicality and speed and athleticism. Like he is on a short list of like the best offensive centers in basketball right now, which is not hyperbole if you look at the numbers. And I mean, you want to talk about the most fascinating story now for the Pistons outside of the playoffs coming up in the coming months is Jalen Duren going to make All-NBA? Because you have players who aren't going to make it due to the 65-game rule. And if Duren does make All-NBA, he could be eligible for an extension upwards of almost $290 million this offseason. The original conversation a lot of people were having was around like 120, 130, 150. We're doubling that now if he makes All-NBA. And that has massive implications on how this team can build going forward, all those things. But at the same time, if he keeps playing like that, you feel a lot more comfortable into having that conversation. It's just been like, like truly the fact that we're talking about like, if he keeps playing like this, like, like fringe superstar stuff, like we're talking about like, and again, I don't know if he can keep this up at, that's a hard thing to do. And, like you said, he's on the top of the billing for these teams now. It's not like all of the teams have been studs. We do have to acknowledge, like the schedule is what it is, but he's gone out and done it against good teams too. Like he's just been doing this on a consistent night in, night out basis. And it's just the confidence is showing. And also I just think if you want to talk about like, to me, like the strongest case for JB being coach of the year, it's what he's done with Jalen Duren. I mean, he specifically they spent a few weeks together this summer in the gym doing workouts individually with Jalen Duren. And like, they talked about like him wanting to, like get to the next level, and they wanted him to be more selfish and more aggressive on offense and all of those things. And, just like the way that Duren has soaked that up like a sponge and has taken a complete leap in his game. I think a lot of that has to be a credit to the coaching staff and the work that they did with him over the summer, but ever since they've been here in general.
Oh, Oh yeah, I mean, I completely agree, especially on the coaching point. I was even really skeptical coming into the year when JP was making those comments. I'm like, do you really want your center to be producing more offense on his own? That was my position at the time. The answer is yes, I really
it's
do.
Absolutely, you do.
It is absolutely the case. I mean, the way he's playing right now, it's like a young Amari Stoudemire. The guy, I get that now he's a center, but you turn back the clock 20 years, he's a power forward with the game that he has right now. It's unbelievable.
I was telling people it's like if Amari Stoudemire had Dwight Howard's frame.
Yeah,
it's
and
terrifying.
You bring up the teams that they played, right? I mean, like, I know that they're not all fantastic teams, but there's been a variety of defenders, like types of very good defenders. Alex Sarr, I know he was coming off that injury, but that's one of the best rim protectors in the league. Jalen Duren gets a shot blocked among some of the most in the league, so theoretically, that's a bad matchup. Didn't matter. Draymond Green, Kristaps Porzingis, two very good defenders. Draymond Green, maybe one of the best all time. Didn't matter. You look at Onyeka Okongwu is a good defender, and he's very mobile. So you're talking about maybe, okay, Duren just has a quickness advantage. Didn't matter, right? Like he continues to find a way. And so you brought it up. I mean, I feel like we have to talk about it a little bit. YouTube user threw this one in the comments, saying that he's hearing talk about all NBA for Jalen Duren. So how bad would that be for the cap? Like, because this is really a two-part question, Sean, right? It's one, okay, he makes all NBA, and I think you and I are both going to be in agreement that he probably should, just given the roster of eligible players. So he makes all NBA, he's going to be eligible for that, super max-ish kind of deal that you just brought up. Yep. Does he get that first, right? And then how close does he get to it if not, right? And what would the implications be?
Yeah. So odds are, so just to kind of explain how it works, there's a provision, in the NBA. Essentially what happens is if you do reach all NBA, you're eligible then for a Supermax extension. And so it activates just another level of pay. When Cade signed his rookie max extension, he signed it with the provision that if he made all NBA, it would go to Supermax, which is exactly what happened. So essentially it would be a very similar thing there with Jalen Duren. Now I would imagine, just like not saying I know anything here, but I'm just going to go out on a limb. If I was eligible for a Supermax, why wouldn't I start the conversation with asking for the Supermax? If it's like, hey, if it's there, why not ask for it? And I'm sure that, that one of the priorities, this offseason, is really going to be mapping out their salary cap, not just for this year, but for years to come. Because, you also have the negotiation window for Ausar Thompson, coming up here too. And so I think this is where Trajan and, his front office, like Michael Blackstone, all these guys, this is where they're going to have to be creative. This is going to be some of their most important work because, essentially, like, as we've kind of talked about before, it's like you can really pay two guys at the max level. And then, from there, it becomes a lot harder to fill out a roster. Like the complications with Oklahoma City is the fact that they have all these guys who are playing really well, but you also have to pay all these guys. And so that's why Oklahoma City, everyone's like, oh, well, they're going to trade all those picks one day and go get Giannis. No, they're holding on to all those picks because they need to replenish and replace their rotation as guys leave. Like Case and Wallace is probably going to have to leave at some point and go get the bag. Like there's guys all throughout the rotation that are going to get paid somewhere else because Oklahoma City just can't afford to do it. And so like for Detroit, like, essentially if you're committing like big money to Ausar, Duren, and Cade, that's your core. And from there, it's going to be like, you're going to have to kind of start bargain binning a little bit around your rotation. Like you're not going to have a ton of room necessarily if you're paying at that point. So my gut tells me that I don't think he's necessarily going to get the Supermax. Well, I would imagine he wouldn't be far off from it. And I think, I think there's also the fact that like, this is a group that, does really enjoy playing together. The way that, like even Duren last night, I asked him about Ausar and like his defensive, production, and he was just gushing about Ausar, and, you know, just like it's a group that genuinely does want to see each other succeed. It is a business at the end of the day, but at the same time, like, I think there's a world where, you know, Duren can get generational wealth, get very close to the Supermax, and for Detroit to be able to keep this team together at a reasonable, you know, capacity.
And I mean, just to that point, Ausar Thompson, if this is, I think we would all agree, I would be shocked if anyone would disagree with this, but the core of this team, it's Cade, Duren, and Ausar Thompson, right? Well, yeah. Ausar Thompson, historically, defense first players don't get paid as much. Now, you know, some of the best defender in the league conversation being the athlete that he is. Okay, maybe it'll kind of go up a little higher than people might expect, but maybe that's the saving grace here. Maybe it's not going to be three guys all earning close or north of 50 mil. It's going to be two guys that are in that range. And then Ausar kind of, you know, still a lot, maybe 35, but
I was kind of thinking 30 to 40 probably. Yeah.
Right. So, you know, not terrible to YouTube users' direct question, right? How bad could it be? It could be worse. It is definitely going to be a constraint, though. But we just mentioned Ausar Thompson. So we got this question last week, or actually 2 weeks ago. I was not here, and unfortunately, I do not know who asked it, but it came from the DBB comments. So my apologies. If you are listening, send us a message and let us know so we can give you credit. But this question from DBB said, how worried are you about JB Bickerstaff's handling of Ausar Thompson's minutes in key moments for the playoffs? It was a problem in the Knicks series, and it has been a problem at times this year. Do you think that it keeps going? So what I want to throw out here just for a second, last season, and remember Ausar Thompson only played 59 games last year, and he only started 48 of those. So he did kind of have that injury recovery window, and they were kind of intentionally keeping him low. But in the regular season, he averaged 22 and a half minutes per game. And then in the playoffs, it was exactly the same, 22 and a half minutes per game. So far this season, Ausar Thompson is playing 26 minutes a night. So it is up a little bit higher than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I to me, I'm not extremely concerned about JB, like the way he handles Ausar's minutes. I understand the conversation, but I can say with 100% certainty, I mean, especially if Ausar's playing, you know, at the level he's been playing of late defensively, over the last 4 games, he has 15 steals and 5 blocks. He had 7 of those steals in 1 game. And he, like, just the level that he's taking, by the way, 23 as of January. So, like, doing all of these things, like, I was telling someone, like, earlier, it's like he might be the most dominant perimeter defender I've ever seen. He's only 23.
Yep.
And, you know, like, just the he just breaks offenses routinely. And, like, I do think that, like, the limitations offensively are something to monitor. I mean, you know, like, we've seen how he was guarded last year, and, like, we've seen in the past how guys, you know, like, who just don't have the threat of the perimeter shot, like Ben Simmons, like, we've seen how they've been guarded in the past in the postseason. But it's, you know, I think, you know, for Ausar in part, I think it's going to be about how, you know, he can overcome those things, you know, as far as, you know, like his athleticism and his ability to penetrate are things that do help. He does also cause a lot of turnovers and turns those into quick offense. So, you know, especially in, like, the, you know, second and third quarter, you know, those are things you want on the court, but also he's your best perimeter defender too. So, like, if you're talking about, like, a close game situation, you know, you're going to want him on the court, you know, against their best ball handler. So, I imagine, you know, because like you said, like, I don't think, like, the Pistons were officially saying it, but I think there was some form of minutes restriction last year. The fact that they kept him exactly at that quota, you know, around that same minute mark, you know, to me, that says, you know, that they were just looking out for the long term there. Whereas now, like, I imagine this postseason, I imagine that average will go up, assuming that he just, you know, is playing at the level that we think he can. And, you know, it's just, I think, again, some of it will just come down to, like, the matchups and, like, who's playing well too, like you said, because they do truly believe in the depth and the rotation, you know, that they have in place. I think they're going to find often that Ausar's just plays so well that he's someone that you just want on the court.
So as the season's gone on, I've been kind of forcing myself to try to rethink the way I've been viewing this team in a playoff setting. I mentioned last week that, maybe I've just been underestimating Jalen Duren and his ability to create his own in a playoff setting when things slow down. Well, this week I have been thinking a little bit about Ausar Thompson, and credit where it's due, the first time that I've heard anyone else really talking about it, and I haven't had the opportunity to bring it up either yet, was actually on the broadcast of that Pelicans game. George and Greg bring up the idea that, Ausar Thompson, he's in the same vein as like a Ben Wallace or a Dennis Rodman, guys that really didn't have much to give offensively, but they were, just absolute keys on defense. They just wrecked whatever the other team was doing. And I've been kind of thinking about that too. Like, is Ausar Thompson very much just a, kind of a Ben Wallace from a modern day? When Ben Wallace was patrolling the paint, that's where all the offense was. Nowadays, it's all on the perimeter. And Ausar Thompson breaks things, like you said, in a way that I can remember as a kid watching Ben break things for other teams as well. So my question to you is, are we all just kind of placing too much weight on the offensive side of the ball for Ausar Thompson in the playoffs? Like, granted, I know he had a really nice game there against Atlanta, and we should talk about that too. We've got a question from Ramester in the DBB comments on it, but I know he had that nice game, and he's an NBA player. It's going to happen. He'll get hot every now and again, but for the most part, it's his unbelievable, otherworldly defense that really provides his value. And is that really that's the key, right, for the playoffs? Are we just overvaluing the offense?
Yeah, no, his defense is 100% the key. I do just think in general, we focus a lot on his offensive limitations when in reality, we're watching one of the best perimeter defenders we've seen over the last 2 decades, right in front of us in real time. JB last night, when I asked about him, he said he compared him to like a young Ron Artest, which when you look at, like someone said, like, I think that's disrespectful. I'm like, I don't think that's disrespectful at all. That's probably like the last true, like probably the best perimeter defender other than Ausar that 2-decade period, so like, to me, like, again, I think those concerns are real in a postseason, setting. I'm not saying they're not, like, I do think like you do have to monitor the fact that teams are going to defend you a little bit differently. But when Ausar does break things to the extent that he does, when he does stay out of foul trouble, which is going to be a really big key in the postseason, especially if he's going against a Brunson who's really good at drawing contact and baiting people into stuff. I think Ausar watched a lot of that footage over the summer and, was really upset with how that ended up. And so, I imagine that's something he's going to be ready for, but like, as long as he's, forcing turnovers, like he's going to get his offense in the open court in a way that a Ben Wallace can't because of his size and, like the limitations, like he's, and on top of that, like he is still able to handle the ball to a certain extent. That is probably the area, like one of the areas he truly has to grow this summer. And I do think sometimes he can force things from a passing standpoint and can get a little bit tighter there. But like in general, he's a guy who just makes really high level basketball decisions mentally. And, overall, like I'm not concerned about like how the minutes are handled. I mean, if it's like a situation, final 2 minutes, they hit like a big shot and Ausar's on the bench, will we have questions? Perhaps. But again, I think sometimes it's matchup specific, it's situational, and, there's pieces of context. But again, there's just not many situations where you can envision him being on the bench on a key defensive play,
Yeah. All right. Well, so we talked a little bit about the offense. I know we kind of like poo-pooed it. We're like, it's not a big deal. But he did, to his credit, have a really unbelievable game there against Atlanta. Scored 18 points, had 5 assists, 4 rebounds. Like, it was a really nice offensive performance. Only 1 turnover, too. And this stretch here with Ausar, his turnovers have been lower, which has been a really big deal. So we got this question here from Ramester that was right after that game from the DBB comments, just asking if that's kind of a glimpse of what we could see in the future. So, do you think that kind of offensive production could be a nightly occurrence one day, or is this just, these are NBA players and some nights they're really going to be feeling it? When that's no discredit to him at all. It's just, guys get hot, right? This is the NBA, best players in the world.
I certainly think we can expect more nights like that in the future. Like, I do think he is a guy, one of those guys that just lives in the gym. And, one key about his game that just really unlocks a lot of possibilities is his elite athleticism and the things that he can do. When that comes into play, like, that's why, like, the jump shot conversation, I do even it's like, I'm not as worried about, because it's like when you have that type of game breaking speed and that effortless, verticality, like, it's one of those things where he's going to figure it out. And, to me, it's like, it's almost kind of like a young Jaylen Brown, in the sense of you see the pieces there, he has the tools, all the physical gifts. It's just about, working on a lot of those things in the gym and just tightening things up and getting better. And, I do envision him, being more of an offensive focal point in the future, partially out of necessity as they, as the roster changes and things like that. But also, I do think, as he just gets more comfortable, within the flow and just, building out his skill set, I do think that is a very tangible possibility that he could look more like that. I mean, is he gonna go 10 for 12 or 9 of 11 every night like he was? Like, probably not. No, it's not going to always be perfect, but generally speaking, I do think he is someone who can be highly efficient and highly effective on that end too. The nice thing is that's just not what they necessarily count on him for.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's get to, I mentioned earlier, we'll talk a little bit about Marcus Sasser. Admittedly, this is delayed. I believe this was our guy, a fella, leaving us a voicemail a little bit ago. This was before Sasser got injured. Duncan Robinson was out, so he was starting in that Miami game. But regardless, we'll just kind of use this as a vehicle to talk a little bit about the unfortunate case of Marcus Sasser right now. So here is our guy, a fella.
First things first. Shout out to Wes. Congratulations on the newborn child, man. That is awesome. Super congratulations. Speaking of new things, Marcus Sasser is starting for the Miami game. I'm calling you straight from the first quarter, ready to talk about how that went. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the game went with Marcus Sasser in there with Duncan Robinson. All right. Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.
All right, Sean. I mean, first of all, we have to give credit where it's due. That was a veteran podcast host transition.
Yeah, what a segue.
Our guy FL. I mean, that was a perfect segue, right? So, I mean, maybe he ought to be hosting, not me, after stuff like that, or at least I ought to be getting lessons from him. But let's talk a little bit about Marcus Sasser. I mean, it's really been a bummer, right? He had this opportunity set forth in front of him when Cade goes down with that injury, and almost immediately he's hurt. He's on the injury report, and I know in that Pelicans game that was really his first one back, and as expected, it wasn't amazing. He had missed about a week of time at that point, so he's still kind of getting himself back up. But what did he miss out on, and then what do you think we could expect out of him as we move through this home stretch?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of been, this stretch has kind of almost been like a microcosm of what his career has been like thus far, where, there's been moments and there's been flashes where you go, whoa, that can be a really good, like a really good, off the bench scorer, someone that you can really, rely on, certainly like the ball handling, the step back three, like a lot of things in his game that, are really flashy and show a lot of potential. But then whether it's, some of the inconsistencies on the court, whether it's some of the health issues, and it's the same, hip injury that was keeping him out at the beginning of the season, for whatever reason, he just hasn't been able to piece it together on a consistent basis. Now, the 3-point shot, ever since he started playing a little bit more in March, it's been pretty solid. He's shooting, right at or right about 40% from three. The problem is, he was shooting all like under 30% inside the arc. And so, the 3-point shot is certainly there. It's just the other elements of his game where he just hasn't been able to piece everything together. Granted, some of that maybe is like whether he was playing through that injury and dealing with some of those discomforts, but again, it's just kind of what it is at the moment. He just hasn't been a high efficiency, score. And so, I do think, as, we start talking about, because, Sasser is going to be coming up, like with, as like a free agent of some, I forget if it's restricted or unrestricted off the top of my head right now, but I do know that, like his contract status is kind of in flux this offseason as far as what that's going to look like in the future. Maybe they could bring him back on some form of team friendly deal, but the problem is, if you're talking about like building the sample size and being able to, like be able to like project and adequately and see what someone's going to be, they just haven't had a lot of it, just because of, whatever has been there, and the sample size that they've gotten has just been like inconclusive or inconsistent. So, it's, again, it just sucks for him, really an opportune time, because, like you said, there was going to be more touches to go around. Certainly someone who, like could have utilized those, but, even then, from what we've seen thus far, it's just kind of hasn't been the consistency you'd want to see quite yet.
Yeah, and for me too, I just continue to be a little disappointed. I don't know if it's just false, like wrong expectations based on his college tape, but coming into the league, it was supposed to be a 3-and-D guard, right? That's really what Marcus Sasser profiled at, albeit undersized, and it's just the defense part of that hasn't really been there. The two runs that the Pelicans made in that game that the Pistons eventually win at the end of the first half and then kind of middle of the third quarter, Sasser was out there for both of them. And it's not just that he was unfortunate to be out there at that same time, but I noticed him getting lost off ball and through screen navigations quite a bit. And it's just unfortunate, right? Like he is a pit bull kind of defender. He talked about it when he was nice enough to be a guest for us on the Pistons Pulse way back when during that summer league for his rookie year. And it's just, his past 5 games, he's got 2 steals. And we know, I'm almost 100% confident he is better than that defensively, even with the size limitations. So to me, like, I don't know if you agree with that. I'd be curious to get your thoughts, but the rest of the season, assuming he can stay healthy, that's his path to minutes, maybe even in the playoffs. If he can really reestablish himself as that defender that can also shoot threes. I know it's great when he gets hot and he has that 16-point explosion against Memphis. It's fun. I love it too. He's entertaining to watch when he gets hot like that. But the defense is far more consistent. And if he could get that going now, I mean, hey, why does Karis LeVert get minutes when he's struggling? He's one of the better guard defenders on this team. If Sasser can be that too, like, and really elevate himself, which I think he has the tools to do, that would unlock some things for JB. But until we get there, it's just kind of, it stinks, right? I just continue to be disappointed with it.
Yeah, the consistency on that end hasn't necessarily been there either. We've seen, he does have the ability, like he is willing to pick up guys full court. He does have when he is healthy, he does have the twitchiness, to be able to stay in front of guys. He can cause some havoc off ball too, and, force turnovers. It's just, there hasn't been enough of those reps, but even then, I do think I do think we are seeing league wide just a lot of, smaller guards just really struggling with the size of the league that really has it really has just gotten to be a larger, longer game where we're just seeing taller and taller guys with bigger and bigger wingspans being able to do more on both sides of the court. And, I do think sometimes some of those mistakes, some of those fouls can stem from having to keep up with some of that. I do think some of it is, there are like the mental things that you have to pick up, and again, a lot of it comes with reps, and they just haven't necessarily been there in a consistent, on a consistent basis. Like he hasn't, he's only played, he's played in 29 games this year, which, is just, you really look at it, it's like, man, that's just, I thought he had played in more than that, if I'm being honest. But it's like, some of it too was, you have a guy like Daniss Jenkins who's coming in and doing as well as he is. And the key difference with Daniss is he's a point guard. He's someone who can run an offense, who can facilitate, who can handle the ball and, run pick and roll and do those things. Sasser's just not naturally a point guard. He's a guy who thrives off ball. And when he does get the ball in his hands, he has one thing in mind, and it's getting that thing up towards the basket.
Sorry about that. My computer was glitching out on me. We'll edit it out and post the fun things that
totally
come with live.
I thought it was me for a second. I was like, oh no.
No. I was literally sitting here and I'm like, I'm hitting the button to unmute. That's not unmute. I'm like, all right, this is taking a while. But yeah, I was gonna bring up Daniss Jenkins as well, because it's not fair, because this isn't something that anyone can change. But the one-to-one comparison for a guy that I think has similar, if not slightly better tools than Marcus Sasser, outside of the height, it's the 4 inches in height, and it's the extra length that he has with arms, like Go Blue Seven's bringing up in the chat, and like you did as well. I thought it was a good point. Just everyone's a little bit taller. It's much harder to survive as that undersized player. Oh man. All right, Sean, do you want to do the downer question, or do you want to talk a little bit about Daniss Jenkins here?
I mean, I think we were just downers kind of for a minute, so maybe we kind of do a little bit of a palate cleanser, and then we get to the downer question.
Okay, all right. I like it. The alternating there. This is a fun question, I thought, from Dreamscraper00 in the DBB comments. Could Daniss Jenkins be the starting 2-guard next to Cade Cunningham next year? What do you think? And just for the record here, Daniss Jenkins' last 4 games, 22 points, 30 points, 19 and 19. He's had 8 or more assists in all of these games. Daniss Jenkins has been on a tear.
Yeah. I think that, like, I wouldn't be surprised if we see that, if we saw that at some point towards the end of next season. But I do think, I wouldn't bet on it being the starting 5 opening night, just because, and again, I've been as vocal of a Daniss supporter as anyone. I've had, I've had, his training coach, Coach Hart on the pod a couple times, really great dude. I just, for one, I think, there's just still, the need for more reps for him as well. I think, he just kind of got out of a little bit of a cold stretch, or kind of like a rough stretch. I think some of that was, teams starting to get some film on him and starting to see what he likes to do. And when you have performances like he did on Prime against the Knicks, like, teams start paying attention to you and they start adding you to the scouting report. And I think, I think a lot of the last couple of weeks, or the last month, has been him learning how to get through that, how to adapt, because that is something that you generally see a lot of rookies struggling with. And I mean, if you look at the amount of games he's played in the NBA, he appeared in a few games last year, but for all intents and purposes, this is kind of his rookie campaign from a volume standpoint. So, he's still someone who I think just, there's just still a lot to learn and just continue to get comfortable, on the NBA level, which isn't really far off from where he was last year with the G League level. He asked to stay with the Crews for the rest of the season because he wanted those reps to work through the struggles he was having earlier in the season. He wanted to improve on his game. I think it's going to be a similar process in the NBA, but we've already seen the flashes. We know when he's got it going that he's a really confident scorer. He's someone who you absolutely can trust to run your offense and be a dependable facilitator. I just also think when you look at the role that he's going to play for this team, I think, in part, he is someone that you want to be able to handle the ball when Cade's not on the floor. And I do think that's where a lot of that benefit comes right now. Is I think you potentially might have your backup point guard for at least the next 2 to 3 years. If he continues to improve the way that we think he can, if he continues to really just be comfortable and gets to a point where they just have to start him, I wouldn't rule that out as a possibility, because he's a guy who works his butt off and he's already defied a lot of expectations. I also just am trying to be realistic though and say, well, there's already kind of been some growing pains you have to go through. I imagine, the life of the NBA, just from what I've seen in the past, there's still growth, not to say he's not a great player, because he's been awesome this year. But again, it's just about, there is still things to get better at and still areas to develop. And there are some things, he just has to sharpen up before he's at the starting caliber player night in, night out. He's not far off though.
Yeah, one of the big ones is that 3-point shooting consistency, right? I mean, that's where it is for me, because I know he went through that big down cold stretch here the past, I don't know, three or so weeks before he broke out of it. Mm-hmm. He is shockingly at 38% on the year. Now that's only on 2.6 attempts per game. The thing is, if he can get that to be consistent, I will say, like, to kind of echo he's not that far off. In theory, a Daniss Jenkins that can be a 38% or a 36 to 38% 3-point shooter on, let's call it 4 to 5 attempts a night. In theory, that works really well next to Cade. I mean, we've talked a lot this season about, hey, maybe the Pistons need a little bit more ball handling in that starting lineup. Daniss Jenkins would give you a little bit more ball handling in that starting lineup, a little bit more variability too, right? Maybe another player that can go create something from the perimeter on their own. Jalen Duren's kind of growing into that, but he's not a perimeter-oriented player. He's creating things for himself out of the mid-range and the mid-post. Daniss Jenkins would be theoretically creating things for himself out on the 3-point line on the perimeter. Like, it's there. I see the vision from Dream Scraper here, and I'm with you that it's not that far off. I think it's really just the 3-point shot coming around, because he is already a very good perimeter defender, right? You're taking not only pressure off of Cade offensively, you're taking pressure off defensively in the guard room as well, having a guy that you could put on a team like, I don't know, I'm struggling to think of an example of a team that has two very good guards, but naturally Ausar is going to take the best one. Daniss could take the next best one, and that could shift Cade up and save his legs a little bit too. I see it. Cleveland? I like it. Cleveland, yeah, that's a perfect example, right? Like, if Daniss Jenkins is going to be playing the way that he's been playing, and what I mean by that is his shooting over the past 4-game stretch. If he's legitimately starting next to Cade, you're not expecting him to be averaging like 22 a night, but something more reasonable than that. But yeah, like, I'd be more than comfortable having Daniss Jenkins maybe chase Donovan Mitchell around and asking Ausar Thompson to handle Harden. That's a perfect matchup there.
Yeah. The other question would just be, who's he replacing in the lineup? Because, it's like a lot of it depends.
Duncan, right?
Yeah. It would have to be Duncan in that case, which I guess that depends on, what everything looks like as far as next year, because I know he signed a 3-year deal, but it's like partially guaranteed. I think there's, in theory, like, they could decide to move off. Although, if I'm being honest, why would they at the moment? He's actually been, I think Duncan's been a great addition for them this year, and I think he's been playing really well. But at the same time, again, it's I think it would just be one of those things where he would have to force Detroit to make that decision, and it's he's shooting his, his best percentage on his highest volume in a few seasons now. Duncan is in Detroit, he's playing really well. So I think in part, the reason why I don't see it opening day is just because, we've kind of said at the beginning, the fundamental problem with the Pistons right now is not the starting 5. Those guys are really good together. It's just the supplementary shooting over the course of a 48-minute period.
Yeah, and if you move Daniss into that starting lineup, you are losing a backup point guard, which is an important note as well. So I don't know. Let's leave it here, because we're giving the palate cleanser, like you said, before we talk about an unpleasant thought here in a minute. So just to be way over the top optimistic, let's just say, look, there is a world by maybe around the All-Star break next year, your starting lineup includes both Daniss Jenkins and Ron Holland. What do you think about that? Agree, disagree? Is it possible?
I'm not sure if I'm going there.
Remember, Sean, we're being overly optimistic.
If we're being overly optimistic, here, how about this? So you're saying there's a chance? How about that? That's kind of the optimism. I wouldn't be going on like Kalshi or anything and making that bet or anything. But you know, I'm not. I guess I wouldn't rule it out.
There you go. I like that because I wouldn't do it either. I'm just gonna say in the utmost optimism, there's a world, and we're not gonna assign a percentage to that, and I'm certainly not gonna put any money on it.
Yeah, I just don't think we're living in that world, but that's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
All right, well, let's stop beating around the bush. This is from Biz Marky Moon in the DBB comments, and it is just an unpleasant thought. So I'm going to knock on wood both before and after reading this one. It says, nobody wants to think about this, but suppose we get upset in the first round. What's next for Detroit? Do we chalk it all up to inexperience, or do they make major changes? And I want to add another question to this for you, Sean, since we're already talking about something unpleasant. What would cause them to get bounced in the first round? Like, what would need to go wrong to actually see this outcome, in addition to all the questions he just asked here?
Well, for one, I think there's like the elephant in the room that we kind of have to talk about, which is what's Cade's condition going to be come game one of the postseason. I think, I think a lot of what Detroit will do is going to depend on that. Because if Cade isn't healthy and they catch like a red hot, like let's say they play like the Magic and somehow, it's like a 6 or 7 game series, but if only they had Cade like healthy or on the court. Like, I don't envision there being like any like major fundamental sweeping changes or any reasons to not feel great about where you're at. If they got punked by like Charlotte or something, Cade is available, ready to go. I do think you have questions. But ultimately, I think if you're talking about what changes would be made or like what would happen is like, I think, what they've said from the beginning of the year is they love the roster that they have in that locker room, and they wanted to give them this season to show what they can be and the opportunity that they have, in front of them. Like, they wanted to see how far this group can get together. And if they go out and don't advance in the playoffs and they do have a dud in the first round, then that comes to, there's questions about what your roster is going to be going forward. Like if Duren has a stinker of a series, I don't think that changes, like the fact that you're going to go out and extend them. But like, I think there might be questions that come up in that conversation. The playoffs are certainly going to factor into that because they are the most important reps of the year. But again, I think a lot of it depends on the surrounding context of it. Like I don't think we're going to see any coaching change in Detroit anytime soon. I don't think we're going to see a general manager change in Detroit anytime soon. I think those guys are, solidly, and there wouldn't be any reason to bring that up, in my opinion, even if they were bounced in the first round this year. But it would certainly be a moment where it's like, all right, you saw what this roster can do. What's your response? And that would be where Trajan would have to get to work. And so that's really what it's all going to come down to is, it's going to come down to how well these guys play when the moment does come. If they, if they are able to get far, I think you feel really good about the direction that you're in and like the roster that you have and, like where you're moving forward with that. But if they were for whatever reason to be bounced and Cade's health isn't really much of a factor, I think, of course, you'd have to have some real difficult conversations about where the roster's at. I think that would be natural.
And it'd probably be on the shooting side of things, right? I mean, like I'm attempting right now live to brainstorm other reasons that could cause the Pistons to have this unfortunate outcome. And I'm really racking my brain. I'm struggling to think of anything else that could really derail this team in that way. And look, to that point, as weird as this is to say, that Atlanta game that they lost on a unfortunately just short tip in from Jalen Duren in overtime, I left that game feeling so much more confident about this team's ability to win a first round series with or without Cade Cunningham on the floor than I had been going into that game. And that's just because, look, the playoffs slow fast teams down. We've seen that for the past feels like 20 plus years, right? And it's great to be fast and agile, but if you can't run away from the guy that's beating you up and you take a punch to the face, it's, good luck. And that tends to happen to those sorts of teams in the playoffs. So I was very worried going into that game. I was very worried once we got to halftime, and then the Pistons kind of woke up. Suddenly the offense wasn't as free flowing. And again, they're doing all of that without Cade Cunningham. So, to me, are you in the same boat? Like, are you still feeling pretty good about that first round series? Honestly, regardless of Cade's conditioning level, because I do feel it seems a very high probability that Cade's back for that series. So we could kind of not think about that negative too much of him just maybe not even playing.
Right. I do feel good about their prospects in a first round series. I think to your point, I think we've seen the adversity of this team just shine through full stop over the last few weeks. And in general, I think the style of basketball that they play translates perfectly to the postseason. And, I think as long as they're playing at the, at the energy level and at the, high level that they can on the defensive side of the court, I think whoever they face in the first round, regardless of matchups, is going to have a really difficult time, especially with the fact that they've, seemingly been able to maintain and in the first round are most definitely going to have, home court advantage. So again, I think how interesting of a series it will be, that will depend a little bit on the matchup. If it's if they face against Philly or Orlando, I'm not as worried as if they were to face, say, a Charlotte, just because of the, how hot they've gotten offensively and some of the shooting things that they present. But even then, a lot of those teams, they kind of have some of the similar youth questions. And I think, if you're just talking about what you should expect, I would imagine that, like you said, we've heard nothing but good updates about Cade and where he's at. I think with where this team's at in the moment, I think they would feel really good about, going into the first round. To me, it's going to be the question of what they can do from there.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same boat. I am endlessly fascinated by the potential of a second round series and how this team looks, how Cade's legs look, how Jalen Duren's legs look, right? I mean, once you get beyond that first round. But look, I know we're up at an hour, so let's end on this. All right, we got a fun question here from Dylan22 in the DBB comments asking if the Magic or the Houston Rockets look to make big changes in the offseason, which I think it's reasonable to suggest they might. So this isn't a pie in the sky question. Who would be a better fit for the Pistons? Our options, Jalen Suggs or Jabari Smith Jr. Sean, what do you think?
It is a really good question. Jalen Suggs, obviously if you're talking about stylistically, he certainly does add a lot of traits that the Pistons would be looking for, in the sense of, he is just another defensive demon. When he is available and healthy on the court, he does do a lot of positive things. He's not quite, not quite a great 3-point shooter, maybe average to slightly below average, but he can get them up there. He has had some good moments. For him, it's really just kind of similar to some of these other guys where it's the health risks with him are very real. Unfortunately, he just has had a very injury riddled career. Whereas with Jabari Smith Jr., I think right now it's you certainly like a lot of the traits and the concept of what he could bring to the Pistons, and maybe being in a situation where he wouldn't be as high on the totem pole is something that could potentially, be beneficial for him. And maybe being around, a more consistent, more stable playmaker and a Cade is something that would be able to help elevate his game. But, Jabari's definitely, it's been probably his best season, and I would probably lean towards him just because of the length and some of those other attributes. And maybe I bet on the 3-point shot a little bit more going forward and, some of the durability stuff. But, it certainly would probably be a little, it would also be a little bit of a gamble just because it hasn't been super consistent in Houston. But at the same time, I don't think a lot of the offensive issues right now, I don't think it's because of him.
Yeah, I actually, so I was really struggling with this one. This is why it's a good question, because both of these are flawed players, kind of like you mentioned. And so curious to hear your response to what I'm going to lay out, because with Jabari Smith Jr., the idea is he's a 3-and-D forward. except he's only one season of his career has he been over league average, 36% from three. Exactly. Yep. One season. And while he has been a pretty good defender, he also just like famously can't dribble the basketball, which is a bit of a limitation on a team that already has a good number of guys around Cade that can't put the ball on the floor. So like, it's not as clear cut as you'd think, but to your point, he's also been very healthy. For the most part, he's only got one season so far in his 4-year career, less than 60 games. That's not true of Jalen Suggs, who I think is a pretty clean fit defensively and as a ball handler. But so far, only it looks like, so he had one season with 75 games played. His second year was 53. He's at 48 right now, so he'll get back up over 50. But, being over 50 is still 30 games missed. He's not a great three-point shooter, about, 33-ish% outside of one outlier year. He does get good volume, though, about 6 per game. If the playmaking's great, the defense is great, but you're worried about the floor spacing, you're worried about the health. So, like, whose limitations are you more okay with as a target? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I really think it just like if the health part wasn't even in the equation, I would take Jalen Suggs gladly. I wouldn't even think much about it. But the reason why I tend to lean a little bit less in that direction is just because, again, those health issues have been very real and they've been very consistent. And if you talk about someone, if you're just talking about like who you would add to your team, and I'm trying to take the long-term view, it's just, I do think those concerns are very real. And if I was a general manager, I don't know if I'd have the guts to roll the dice on someone with those many question marks,
Yeah, I think I'm leaning the same way as you. And the other thing to note here is just kind of to the earlier conversation we were having with Jalen Duren. Unfortunately, I kind of feel like both of these would be a bit out of the reach for the Pistons, not for a lack of assets that Magic or the Rockets might be interested in, but for the money. These guys already got paid. Yeah, they already have been extended.
Yep. Not great contract.
No, they're not. And if the Pistons are going to pay Jalen Duren, and you're already looking at presumably Ausar Thompson needing a hefty extension, but not to the same level, then I just don't know if you got the room for a fourth guy in that same range as maybe Ausar Thompson's probably looking at.
Especially one who you have real limitations and questions about. It's at that point, you're really muddying up the salary cap.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think on that, I don't know. Actually, we can't end on that note. Sean, give us just one positive thing that you're looking forward to the rest of this season. Is it just watching more of Jalen Duren domination? Are you looking for something else? What are you looking forward to over this last few weeks?
Yeah, a couple things. I would say, just looking forward to continuing to see, Duren with the offensive reps and just having more of those performances. Undeniably, seeing someone at that size with that kind of face-up game, it is just really enjoyable to watch. And the growth and the confidence he's had on that end is just really just been fascinating to cover. But also I'm just looking forward to seeing postseason basketball in Detroit again, and just the energy that brings, and how loud that building was last year. I imagine it's just going to be even crazier this
Hardaway
year.
Junior corner 3 pop I still think about. I can't lie.
Oh my goodness, man. That was unreal. I was sitting with Rod Beard at the time. He actually, now he works in Atlanta, but he was like, there was no way I was going down to Atlanta before experiencing some playoff basketball here, because I've heard a lot of good things. And I'm like, man, you have no idea. And when he heard that pop, he just looked at me and was like, man. And that's just a moment where I literally had a headache for 3 days after that game. It was unreal in that building.
Man, I'm looking forward to it too. So there you go. I like that end note much better than the other one we were going to have. 100%. So on that, let's wrap it up. Sean, first, let everyone know, let all the listeners know where they can find the great work you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. You can go on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcasts, look up From Half Court. I'm going to be posting there, a lot more consistently, and, a lot more content coming with the postseason coming. And then also you can follow me on Twitter or, on social media at Sean Half Court. So you're going to find a lot of like real-time coverage, like post game media stuff. That's where, all that's going to be. So be sure to check it out. Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. We'll definitely have you back on. Hopefully, I think it'd be a good one to do before the playoffs again. So
absolutely,
watch your chat inbox for that. I'm sure we'll pull you back in. But on that, guys, make sure if you're watching us here live, do like and subscribe as well. Like and subscribe, like with the podcast on Spotify, on Apple. I know you could do that there. All of that does help us out. You guys know these algorithms, how they work. So it is helpful. We really appreciate that. And leave a comment too if you can. We do peruse those and respond when we can, and enjoy reading them as well. Just like a couple of callers, Jacob and a fella used our voice line. Please do that. We love it when we get the voicemails. We love hearing your guys' voice. So that number is 313-355-2717. Of course, special thank you to Sean Corp, the managing editor of Detroit Bad Boys, for supporting the show. Shout out to you guys for all the great questions, great talking points. We'll catch you next week, whether you're on your commute or live with us here on YouTube. We can't wait to talk more Detroit basketball with you.